Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Adult Education and Literacy Summer Business Meeting. This is day 2. We're glad to have you back. Our live event will begin shortly. While we're waiting for everyone to join, let's go ahead and go through some basic controls. So on this screen here, if at any time during the session you'd like to access the closed captioning, you can select the CC icon located on the lower right-hand corner of your screen. If you look down here on this slide, it's at the bottom of the slide there. At the top right-hand corner of your screen, you'll see a dialog bubble with a question mark. If you click on that icon, it will open the live Q&A. So once you open the live Q&A, this will be where you'll ask any questions you have during the session. At the top of the screen here on this page, you can see 3 tabs on the Q&A page. There's a featured tab, a My Questions, and a filter by. That's filtering by either the most recent question or the most liked. So under the first tab, Featured, you'll find all the questions and answers that have been published by our moderators. You can select the thumbs up icon next to a question that you like. The My Questions tab will also show all the questions you submit and any private replies from the moderator. So if you want to see just your questions, click on the My Questions tab. You can filter questions based on the most recent or the most liked by using that drop-down menu next to the right of the My Questions tab. So now taking a look at the bottom of the pane, click the purple Ask a Question button to submit your question. When you select the purple Ask a Button question, this will take you to the My Questions page. And here on that page, at the bottom of the page, be sure to type in your full name to the right of the person icon. You'll see that little person. Enter your name, and then in the box under your name, go ahead and type your question. Then click the icon of that paper airplane to submit your question. Our moderators will be available to read those questions, publish them, or respond to you privately. So that's a quick review of the live event screen. Thank you all very much for joining us today on day 2. We'll get started in just a moment with our first session. That first session is from SRM and Audit Resolution. We're going to have Alma Gonzalez, Mary Milan, and Ruth Curitan present. And before we get started with that session, we're going to have a few words from our Interim State Director for Adult Education and Literacy, Mahalia Baldini. Take it away, Mahalia.
Good morning, everyone. And again, thanks for joining us. As Ann said, this is day 2 of our AEL summer business meeting. We've got one more day and we have tried to pack this with as much information for you guys as possible. So we hope that you're enjoying it and you're cooking up some good questions for us for our presenters for today. So we have Alma, Mary, and Ruth, and these guys are amazing. They support us a lot here in what we do with AEL, and while compliance isn't always, everyone's favorite topic, we're thrilled that they're here, and our goal is to always be very transparent with you guys. So I hope that you enjoyed today's session. Ask questions. They're going to be here to really answer your questions. And this may be the first time that you're hearing this. We have a lot of new directors out there and a lot of folks that are in new positions. So take this opportunity and they're going to run us through what it really is like to be monitored from Texas here at TWC. And I'm going to kick it off and kick it over to Alma, who's going to get us started.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alma Gonzalez, and I work with subrecipient monitoring. I am one of the program specialists and also the trainer. I have with me today Mary Milan I will allow her to introduce herself.
Good morning, I'm Mary Milan. I'm the manager of fiscal operations for subrecipient monitoring, and I'm also one of the 2 QA managers, and I will be presenting the second half of our presentation.
Also working with us in the background, answering your questions under the Q&A is Brian Shaw. And we will have Ruth Curitan presenting to you at the end regarding audit resolution. So let's get started with subrecipient monitoring. Why is it that we monitor? Well, if you look at your contract under the next slide, if you look at your contract, under section 12, it states that the grantee shall grant access to the right to examine, copy, or mechanically reproduce all reports, books, papers, documents, automated data centers, and other records pertaining to this contract. Such rights of access and examination are granted to the duly authorized representatives of TWC and other state and federal auditing agencies. Also, under section 13, under monitoring, audits, and evaluations, subsection 2 states, the agency reserves the right to conduct an independent audit of all funds received by the grantee under this grant award. The audit may be performed by a local government audit agency staff, a certified public accountant firm, or other auditors as designated by the agency, and must be conducted in accordance with applicable rules and regulations, grant award guidelines, and established professional standards and practices. Also, SRM is required by federal law to ensure compliance both financially and contractually with federal, state, and local guides. So, our objective, if you go to the next slide, our objective for today is that we talk about, we take you through what you can expect when your agency is selected to be reviewed by our department. We will take you through the process of what we do to prepare for a review, during a review, and after the review. Now keep in mind that due to COVID-19, the requirements that we will be addressing here may change or differ depending on the situation at the time that your entity is scheduled for review. So what can you expect? What can you expect during an audit? Well, if you go to the next slide, before the review, let's talk about our monitoring process on the next slide. Once your agency has been selected for an audit, the project manager will determine a week that we will be on site. Once we have established that, the project manager will contact the grantee to schedule the review. Now, it will be up to the grantee to determine whether the week that we have established for your review is a viable week. We do keep in mind any holidays or breaks, such as spring breaks, that the grantee may have when scheduling our review. It will be up to the grantee again to determine if that week is viable. Now keep in mind, for example, for FY21, our review starts September 1st through August 31st of 2021. So we have already started scheduling those dates in our reviews for that period. So depending on when we contact you, the team may or may not have a large leeway of when they can reschedule that date. So once we've established the week of review, we will confirm that approximately 12 to 13 weeks prior to the on-site review with an engagement letter that will be sent to the contact person that is indicated on the contract. Most contracts have a contact sheet that identifies the name of the person responsible for executing the contract deliverables. If there's not a name identified, we will then send it to the person that signed the contract. The engagement letter only verifies the dates that we are scheduled to be on site, and it allows the grantee to designate a person to be our point of contact between SRM and the grantee. Once that is established, approximately 8 weeks from the on-site review, we will send out a document request packet that outlines documents that we need to review to assist us in developing our desk review. The DRP will be sent electronically to either the program director or whomever is designated on the engagement letter. Because we are sending the DRP electronically, some systems will send our emails to either the clutter box or the junk folder of your email. We ask that you look at that periodically to make sure if it's fallen in there. The grantee will have 3 weeks to prepare and upload the documents into SharePoint. We will go over SharePoint in a later slide. If you go to the next slide, it shows exactly what a DRP will look like. The document request packet is 4 pages long and consists of information requested for both program and fiscal. Areas covered in the DRP consist of the organizational charts, contracts and non-financial agreements that you have, cost allocation plans, accounting records, check register, the subrecipient GL or accounting records, a list of bank accounts, bank reconciliations for the scope of our review, trial balances, and bank statements, payroll reports, also class schedules, and along with your policies and procedures. If you have any questions regarding any of the information being requested, you will have a contact person, which is usually the project manager assigned to your review, along with their phone number that you can contact at any time. It's very important that you adhere to all deadlines and that you submit the information on or before the deadline provided on the documentation request packet. Again, all information regarding the DRP will be submitted through SharePoint. And if you look on this document under the project, it says 20 and then it'll have your project number. Keep that in mind because we're going to use it on the next slide under the SharePoint. This is an example of SharePoint. Once you have all your required documents for the DRP, a designated staff person will be given access to SharePoint, and that person will upload all the files into their designated folder. All grantees will be monitored about every 3 years, or more frequently based on risk assessment. When the grantee opens SharePoint, you will only have access to your folder. You will not be able to see any other folder. The screenshot on this page is what we at SRM see when we open the library. Your agency may have had a previous monitoring review, so your folder may have more than one folder. Each folder will be identified using the fiscal year. Make sure that you're adding new information to the correct folder. Our FYs are from September through August. The FY, you will note it on the DRP on the previous, what I asked you to look at under the project, that will be the year that you would enter the information under that folder. If we go to the next slide, we have our pre-planning meeting. Approximately 5 weeks before the on-site review, we will have a meeting with AEL staff to obtain their feedback on the areas we anticipate to test. At that time, we will determine if they have any concerns that may require additional follow-up or testing while on site. We always get feedback from other departments to ensure that everyone has input and concerns are brought to our attention to determine whether or not follow-up or monitoring is required while on site. Once we review all the information in our document request packet, we establish our samples and questionnaire, which is on the next slide. The samples of the files or the transactions that we will use to test will be sent to the grantee, along with questionnaires that we will need to have completed upon our arrival. Samples and questionnaires are normally sent to the grantee the Tuesday before our on-site review. The scope of our review is normally for fiscal purposes because they report on the 20th of each month for the previous month's activities. However, if needed, we do hold the right to monitor up to the date that we exit in order to expand our sample. If you have any questions on this, you're welcome to contact your project manager. Once we sent that, we will have a pre-review. The project manager or the PM will contact you and make arrangements for a time and location of the entrance conference. In the same meeting, we will need to know approximately how many staff from your office will be present. It is up to the grantee to determine whom in their staff will need to be at the meeting. Depending on the size of the review and its complexity, we may have anywhere from 2 to 5 monitors on site for that week. If special instructions are needed, please inform the PM. Depending on the location of the review to our home office, which is located in Austin, we may drive or we may fly and rent cars. If parking has been set aside for the monitors or parking is in a specific area, please let the project manager know so that they can inform the rest of the staff. Maps of the facility and any other instructions are helpful when we are trying to locate the building that we will be having the entrance conference in. Again, keep in mind that due to COVID-19, adjustments for the on-site review will be determined closer to the scheduled time of the review. Now, what can you expect during your review? We always start our reviews with an entrance conference. Project managers will go over the agenda, which outlines the expectations of the review. Project managers will have all staff introduce themselves, and all attendees who will need to sign in using our sign-in sheet. A copy of the sign-in sheet can be provided to the grantee for their records. Usually at the end of the entrance conference, staff will approach their contacts to introduce themselves, exchange phone numbers, or share business cards if that is the way that you conduct business, and arrange for a date and time to go over the questionnaire or obtain a process. This process is obtained early in the review, unless there are scheduling conflicts. The PM will also schedule the frequency of in-person debriefings and status reports with management. Now, in-person debriefings are optional. However, the day before the exit conference, a debriefing must occur to discuss the issues that will be noted in the exit conference report. Debriefing and status reports will be conducted with the program director or their designee. We will discuss status reports in another slide later in this presentation. Now, our review will commence. Monitors will take inventory of the requested files. Any file transaction missing will be noted. Monitors will sign out the files for the duration of the review. All files provided will be returned at the end of the on-site review. Both the grantee and TWC monitor will sign out the files. And once the review is completed, the files will be inventoried back to the grantee. All files will need to be provided no later than Tuesday morning. If a file is not provided, all testing attributes will be failed unless documentation can support circumstances beyond your control, such as the files were in a basement and there was flooding. If that is the case, we're going to want to see insurance paperwork or something to support that actually happened. Throughout the review process, staff will work with the grantee contacts to obtain clarifications, obtain further documentation, review policies and procedures, etc. Before the end of the review, the TWC monitor will go over each file with the grantee contact for the areas tested and discuss any failed attributes. This will allow the grantee staff to provide further documentation, if it's available, prior to our exit. This also ensures that there are no surprises at the end of our review. Now, what are the areas that we are going to be testing? Well, for program, we'll be testing eligibility and assessments, and we will be going based on the AEL Assessment Guide 2020 to 2021. For eligibility and intake, what we look for is supporting documentation in the file that supports the client is eligible for the program. All required documentation are completed, signed, and dated by both the participant and the parent if applicable, and along with the AEL staff or the grantee staff. We also look for in the assessments, we look for that the assessments are done timely based on the AEL guide. Copies of the assessment outcomes match data entered into Teams, and that all assessments identified in Teams are supported in the case file. Now, from this point on, Mary Milan will be presenting the rest of the monitoring section.
Thank you, Alma. Now I will go over the rest of the monitoring process, starting with the fiscal areas tested. During our disbursement testing, monitors verify that all transactions charged to the grant are allowable, reasonable, necessary, allocated correctly, and are properly supported. An example that is relevant right now during COVID-19 would be emergency procurements such as iPhones or tablets or something for staff and students. In this case, you would need to have documentation to support why the purchases were necessary and reasonable based on the circumstances at the time the purchase was made, and justification on how the purchases benefit the grant. Oh, also, I wanted to remind you that you can ask questions in the Q&A section at any time during our presentation, and then Brian will either answer them during the presentation or we'll address questions at the end. For a more in-depth information about disbursements, the Financial Manual for Grants and Contracts, which we call the FMGC, covers areas of disbursement testing, including Chapter 8 for cost principles, Chapter 11 covers cost allocation and resource sharing, and Chapter 12 covers indirect cost rates. Also, the following adult education and literacy letters can help you. There's AEL Letter 0415 on cost allocation and spending priorities, and AEL Letter 0319, combined funding effective April 30th, 2019. So those are some references you can use. The next area we test is procurement. On January 1st of 2020, the FMGC was updated to include new procurement thresholds that were put out by the federal government, which affect micro purchases, which are for supplies and services that are less than or equal to $10,000. Grantees can make micro purchases without soliciting price or rate quotations if the grantee considers the price to be reasonable based on information such as research, experience, prior purchases, or other information. However, the basis should be noted in support documentation or specified in the grantee's policies and procedures. And that would include who was authorizing the purchases. So it needs to be spelled out correctly in your procedures. The next type of procurement is small purchases, and therefore any purchases less than or equal to $250,000, which is the simplified acquisition threshold right now. So that includes anything that is not supplies and services under $10,000, and then also anything else under $250,000. And the next area would be formal procurements, which are procurements where the total value of the procurement exceeds the simplified acquisition threshold of $250,000, including all options. So you need to remember that it's the total value of the contract. Small and micro purchases are usually tested with the disbursement sample. Monitors may test procurement of leases based on the applicable procurement threshold of the lease amount, which includes all options. So you have to look, if you have a lease for 10 years and it has 2 5-year options, you would have to take the total value of the contract for 20 years, and that would tell you which option you should use. For additional information on conducting procurements, you would refer to Chapter 14 of the FMGC. Just a reminder that your procurement policies and procedures can be more restrictive than what is outlined in the FMGC, but they can't be less restrictive. If your policies are more restrictive, we will be monitoring based on your own policies. So for instance, if you haven't updated them since January, we will monitor based on whatever your policies were at the time that the procurement was conducted. The next area of testing is cash management. TWC monitors review your accounting records and information in the cash draws and expenditures reporting system, which we call CEDAR, for the contracts under review. A walkthrough of the cash management process may be conducted for a selected month during the scope of the review. For testing of financial reporting, we analyze the expenditures reported in CEDAR compared to the general ledger, which you have provided in the document request packet. TWC monitors will follow up on any variances noted, and a walkthrough of the financial reporting process may be conducted for a selected month during the scope of the review. Usually there is one combined walkthrough for both cash management and financial reporting. And you can refer to AEL letter 01-13, cash draws and expenditures reporting instructions, for guidance on cash management and financial reporting. There are a couple of additional areas we test. The first area is monitoring and oversight, which is required by TAC code 802.82, entitled AEL Grant Monitoring Activities, and also FMGC Chapter 19 on monitoring, and your AEL grant agreement. Grantees that receive federal and/or state funds administered by TWC must conduct regular fiscal and program monitoring of their activities and those of their subrecipients or consortium partners. The monitoring must cover all programs, functions, or activities supported by federal and/or state funds administered by TWC, and be sufficient to accomplish the following objectives. Determine that expenditures have been charged to the cost categories and within the cost limitations specified in the applicable laws and regulations. Also, to determine whether there is compliance with provisions of applicable laws and regulations, and to provide technical assistance as necessary and appropriate. Monitoring must also include the development and implementation of a risk assessment tool, a monitoring program, and a reporting and resolution process. Written policies and procedures that describe and support the monitoring process must be developed and implemented. The next area we monitor is personally identifiable information, which we call PII. Based on the Office of Management and Budget and Department of Labor, Employment and Training Administration definitions, TWC defines PII as follows. PII is information that can be used to distinguish or trace an individual's identity, either alone or when combined with other personal and identifying information that is linked or linkable to a specific individual, which includes social security numbers, telephone numbers, birth dates, marital status, educational history, and financial information, to name but a few. WD letter 02-18, entitled Handling and Protection of Personally Identifiable Information and Other Sensitive Information, provides more information on handling PII. The next area we're going to cover is status reports. Throughout the week, the project manager will update your management team on whoever is designated as the point of contact on the progress of the review, which may include any missing documentation, any pending information, the status of testing and the results of the testing, and any potential issues that we've identified. The first status report will usually be sent Tuesday or the second day of the review if it didn't start on Monday, and each day prior to the exit conference. As Alma mentioned earlier, the grantee may also request in-person debriefings, so it's up to you whether you want to have those in person. And also it depends on what's going on with COVID-19. Now we should take a minute to talk about issues. If they're discovered during the review, it will be noted on an exit conference report, which we'll discuss in more detail in a minute. It may result in an issue or an area of concern in the final report. Issues or deficiencies in program performance based on material non-compliance with statutory, regulatory, or program requirements for which corrective action is required. Usually, they relate to a systemic weakness, and they may result in question costs. Issues usually result in the grantee submitting documentation to audit resolution based on the recommendation in the report. This can take the form of revised policies, training agendas, and sign-in sheets, or remitting the amount of the question cost. This will be covered in more detail in the audit resolution section, which Ruth is going to do. If it doesn't end up being an issue, it may be an area of concern. Areas of concern or deficiencies where corrective action is not technically required, and there's no recommendation in the report. Although areas of concern may not require the grantee to respond to the concern, you should take measures to correct the concern internally. If the area of concern continues, it may become an issue in a subsequent review, so it may be elevated. An example would be the grantee did not ensure the self-attestation form used by one consortium partner contained all required elements. However, through monitoring, the grantee addressed this issue with the consortium partner. So the grantee's already done something to address the issue, so we're just noting it, and there's nothing that they have to do to follow up for audit resolution purposes. The next thing we're going to cover is the exit conference report or agenda. At the end of the review, the team will exit with the grantee. An exit conference report will be part of the meeting and will include all the issues or potential issues that were noted, any areas of concern, any missing documentation. It also includes resources available to the grantee after we leave. So like the contract manager and technical assistants, things like that, the project manager. And finally, a sign-in sheet. Sign-in sheets are required for both entrance and exit conferences. And to make sure that you and your, please make sure that you and your staff write legibly with your name and your title. When possible, provide business cards like Alma stated earlier, because it helps us document the correct information. Now we'll go over after your review, because the report doesn't just write itself once we leave. First of all, we go into the project wrap-up stage. TWC monitors will complete their fieldwork and submit the project for review. Once it's been submitted, the PM is required to review all work conducted to ensure completeness, accuracy, and that all issues are supported. The project is also reviewed by management. As I mentioned earlier, I'm one of the QA managers, and so is Brian, who's graciously answering questions for us today. And then also it goes to our management as well for review. Then the report writers will start working on the final report. Sometimes there may be circumstances that cause a delay in the report being issued. An example would be if monitors are waiting for a determination or input from other departments or the Office of General Counsel. Next, I'd like to cover some common monitoring issues. This is not saying you'll have them, but it is some of the ones we've run into in the past. The first one I'm going to go over is client eligibility. We've noted errors related to enrollment forms. They should be signed, dated, and complete. Also, they must contain all elements required by the AEL program. So if they don't, that can be a problem. And if applicable, the form must contain the signature of the participant and the parent. For 16 and 17-year-olds, if a student is court ordered, the order must state that the student is required to participate in the AEL or GED program. It also must be signed by a judge and dated. Withdrawal forms must state the date the student withdrew from the school, and they must be signed and dated by a representative of the school, such as a counselor or principal. So this gives you an idea of the kinds of things we're looking for when we're dealing with client eligibility. Another issue we have found is missing assessments. All assessments noted in TEAMS must be supported with documentation maintained in the case file. Also, the individual training, education, and career, or ITEC plan, must reflect the progress of the client and should be updated when applicable. We've had some errors where they had the initial one, but they didn't ever update it. And like I mentioned before, monitoring and oversight must be conducted according to TAC code 802.82, which is AEL grant monitoring activities, and your grant agreement. Also, grantees must have policies and procedures that ensure the protection of the personally identifiable information, including proper storage and disposal of the PII information. So in some places they may have been doing a good job of protecting it at their desk and stuff, but they maybe dropped the ball a little on the disposing of the PII. So that's another thing we look for. Next, I'd like to go over fiscal monitoring issues. Probably the biggest issue overall, and this actually applies not just to fiscal, but to program also, is support documentation. Documentation required may include, but is not limited to, at least for fiscal, travel records, timesheets, invoices, contracts, mileage records, billing records, telephone bills, and other documentation that verifies the expenditure amount and the appropriateness of the grant. Documentation that is required is also driven by your entity's policies and procedures, which we consider during our review. The golden rule is if you aren't sure, you should probably include it. And if you're doing anything out of the ordinary, write a memo. And especially now in this times of COVID-19, you may have emergency procurements, like I mentioned earlier. Whatever you're doing, just documentation is key, because that allows us a snapshot of what you were thinking, your rationale at the time that you made that decision. Documentation is usually a contributing factor for most micro and small purchase issues. These could relate to using the wrong method based on the thresholds and your policies, following the right method but not documenting what you did, or restricting full and open competition in some way. I know it's not relevant right now with COVID-19 going on, but issues with travel and meals usually relate to travel reimbursement policies that are not in compliance with the state travel guidelines. An example would be not limiting reimbursements for meals to the lesser of actual costs or the maximum state rate in effect on the day that the expense was incurred, in accordance with WD letter 19-11. However, grantees may choose to be more restrictive. Also, hotel and mileage reimbursement should not exceed the approved GSA rates for the area and the time of travel. This is another area where you may choose to be more restrictive. Leases can be another area that gets overlooked. For leases that are being charged to the grant, Procurements must be conducted in accordance with FMGC guidelines. For all the areas mentioned, the program director should think about how to meet grant-specific requirements if they differ from what you would usually do for your entity or organization. In the past, as I was reviewing prior reports, cost allocation has been a common issue. However, currently, only AFLA combined funding and EL Civics are required for allocation of funding sources. So that's not as big of an issue going forward, but grantees may also have disbursements that require allocations between program and administrative activities. So that's something to keep in mind as well. If you have an indirect cost rate, according to the U.S. Department of Education regulations at 34 CFR 76.563 through 76.569, indirect costs charged to funds made available under AFLA are limited to the lesser restricted indirect cost rate in the grantee's current approved indirect cost rate agreement. The restricted indirect cost rate approved for the grantee is the lesser of the grantee's approved indirect cost rate, or 8%, which is a cap. And now Ruth Cureton will go over the audit resolution process.
Ruth, just go ahead and unmute your microphone. We're really anxious to hear what you have to tell us.
Good morning, everybody. I'm sorry. This is Ruth Cureton. I am with the audit resolution section of SRM, although we are independent of the work that SRM does. Basically, I'm just going to go over the purpose of audit resolution and what happens if you have findings in the monitoring report. So the purpose of audit resolution is to work with the boards and grantees to resolve the findings noted in the state monitoring reports. The following diagram shows where audit resolution falls within the monitoring process, and Alma and Mary just covered the first 6 steps. You see us at number 7 right there on the diagram. Audit resolution begins after the final report is issued, and we also feed our information into the planning phase for the following year's monitoring. During the pre-planning phase, we also communicate to the monitoring team how each of the findings were resolved from the prior year's monitoring. Next slide, please. The resolution process is identified and required by Commission Rule 40 of the Texas Administrative Code, Part 20, Section 802.65B. Based on when the monitoring report is issued, the audit resolution section will prepare and issue an initial resolution letter, which notifies a board, AEL grant recipient, or agency grantee or contractor of administrative findings and question costs. The recipient of the letter then has 45 calendar days from the date the letter is emailed to respond. In the monitoring reports, we have 2 types of findings. They're administrative findings or question costs or question costs. Administrative findings, for the corrective actions, we normally request information to address the weaknesses that were identified in the monitoring reports. These include, but are not limited to, any updated policies and procedures, recent monitoring and the results of the monitoring conducted for the weak areas identified, or any recent training documentation that may have been conducted. There's also sanction requests for unresolved findings if they go on. For the question costs, there's usually eligibility documentation that we may request, any procurement documentation, and any additional documentation for us to consider in allowing the question costs. If there's no additional documentation that can be provided by the grantee and they disallowed costs, they will be required to repay the cost by remitting a check payable to TWC. If the grantee disagrees with the disallowed costs, we go through a 3-step process. So first we have an initial determination. If the question costs set forth in the initial resolution letter are not resolved, an initial determination is issued notifying the grantee of the question costs. Step 2, there's an informal resolution period. This is a 60-day period from issuance of the initial determination for the grantee to submit a response, including providing evidence or documentation of the appropriate actions taken. Step 3, the final determination. This is if the question costs remain unresolved at the end of the 60-day period. Audit resolution will then issue a final determination to notify the grantee of allowed or disallowed costs and to establish the debt. The grantee then has the right to appeal the final determination and request a state level hearing. Next slide, please. The appeal process for question costs, they have to request stating a specific reason for appeal. This is sent by the grantee to TWC Office of General Counsel within 10 calendar days from the final determination date, and it must be sent by certified or registered mail. If an appeal is requested and approved, a hearing officer is designated and the collection of the debt is pending until final decision of the hearing. Failure by the grantee to timely request a hearing waives their right to a hearing, and the final determination shall constitute TWC's final action and is not subject to further review. After this, it brings us to the audit resolution closure. For administrative findings, once the response is received and documentation adequately addresses the findings and no additional information is needed, an audit resolution report is issued, closing the monitoring report. For question costs, once the check is received and audit resolution, they then issue the audit resolution report, closing the monitoring review. If there is an appeal and the final decision is in favor of the state, a check for the disallowance is requested and the file is closed once the check is received. And that usually concludes the resolution process for any findings. Do we have any questions? I know during our presentation, SRM and audit resolution, Brian has been fielding questions. If you guys want to ask any questions on both of these presentations, you may do so at this time.
Thanks, Ruth. This is Mahalia. We've got a lot of questions that are happening in the chat and in the Q&A, and I think Brian, myself, and maybe a few others are going through there and trying to get those answered as much as we can here since we've got some time. So maybe you guys can hang out for a little bit. If you have any additional questions, continue to put them in the Q&A and we will stay live while we are answering those. I will say our plan for all of our sessions for the Summer Institute is if we feel like we don't have what we need to answer the question kind of on the spot and be super responsive in the moment, we are going to be reviewing all of the Q&A and all of the chat that's coming in, and then our plan is to go back and release something, you know, in writing that has, you know, the answers on there. So don't feel like, you know, you've got to screenshot all of this. Our plan is to after the summer business meeting is over, that we'll come back and we'll put this information back out there for you. But go ahead and get all those questions in there. There's really great questions that are coming in, and that's why we're doing this, because we want to be very transparent and get you guys the information that you need. I just wanted to say thank you to our presenters today. I hope you guys have time to hang out for a little bit and help us out with the Q&A. For the rest of you, We are going to be transitioning into a break before our next session, which will be myself and talking about high school equivalency distributions and process and some fun stuff. So come back, go take a break if you don't have a question to ask. And I think we also have a survey that we would like for those of you who are participating with us today. This is new for us. It's our first sort of virtual conference or mini conference as it would be. So fill out the survey. It helps us to just kind of see what your thoughts are about doing this in the future, things you liked, things you thought maybe should be changed just about the overall process. We'd love to hear from you. But stick around or go get a coffee and we'll see you back here at 10:30 for the next session.
Hello, everyone. This is Elena Zachman from the Adult Education and Literacy Office. So we still have about 144 attendees who are signed on. So thank you so much for sticking around from our session, and our moderators and the SRM staff are still going through the questions that are under your featured tab in the Q&A. So they are answering those, and if you want to take a look, check them out, see what the answers are, you can always give a thumbs up to those questions that you like the most or feel are most relevant to you. We love to see your feedback. And if you scroll to the bottom of your featured tab, you will find a link to the survey for your post-session survey. So please take a moment. It's very short, about 7 questions, takes only a minute. Give us your feedback. We'd love to see what you think of your experience here on our Teams Live event virtual conference. We will get started. We have some time before our next session, so stretch, get some coffee, water, and we will be back at about 10:25. Good morning, everyone. This is Elena Zachman with the Adult Education and Literacy Office. We still have about 112 attendees logged in right now from our first session. We are 30 minutes out from our second session today, and we still have lots of activity going on in our live Q&A. Just so that you know, we are going to clear out those session 1 questions around 10:15 this morning to get ready for session 2. But as Mahalia had mentioned, we will be publishing all of those questions together in one document and sending them out later next week. And just so that you are aware, for the sessions, we do have those handouts, and the link for those handouts is posted at the top of your featured tab from TCAL. They did a great job posting those. And so if you need any of the links or the document references in the session earlier this morning, those are all inside that handout. And the handout provides all the content that was shared from the slides. So feel free to download that copy. You have that, and it is accessible. So we appreciate you, and we want you to have all of the information that you need. So take a look at those handouts. They are a wonderful resource for you. And our presenters worked so hard to put together that information in one consolidated place for you. So we have about another 25 minutes or so before we begin our next session. So be sure to take a coffee break or a water break, stand up and stretch, and then we will see you again at 10:30. Good morning, everyone. This is Elena Zachman from Adult Education and Literacy. We are at 10:17 a.m. right now. Our second session for today will begin at 10:30. So be sure to take your break and stretch. Do not be alarmed. We have cleared out the questions that you will see in the live event Q&A that were under your featured tab to get ready for the next session. But as Mahalia previously has mentioned, we will be sending all of those to you in one document, an FAQ put together. So we appreciate all your questions. Keep them coming during the sessions, and we will get started here in just a little while.
So good morning, everyone. We're back again for session 2. It's about 10:25. So I'm Ann Savino. I'm going to walk you through those few orientation slides we have for our live event. So while we're waiting for everyone, let me go ahead and go over these with you. So here we are on this slide during this session. If you'd like to access the closed captioning, if you look at the bottom, the lower right-hand corner of your screen, you can click on the icon CC located there and get your closed captions. At the top right-hand corner of your screen, you're going to see a dialog bubble with a questions mark. If you click on that icon, it will open the live Q&A. So at the top right-hand corner of your screen, you'll see the dialog bubble with a questions mark. Clicking on it opens a screen for the live Q&A, and this is where you'll ask any questions you have during the session. You can see 3 tabs on the pane. You'll see a featured tab over here. In the center is My Questions. And then at the third is the most recent or liked. So under this first one, the featured tab, you'll find all the questions and answers that have been published by our moderators. You can select a thumbs up icon next to a question if you like it. That helps us to drill in and see how many people are interested and want to make sure that we get that question answered. The My Questions tab is a good tab to look at to see all of the questions that you individually have submitted. If you get a private reply, it will also appear there. Once again, you can filter the questions based on the most recent or the most liked by using the drop-down menu next to the right of the Questions tab. So we're on day 2 here, and we're going to move on. Oh, I think I slept, well, I skipped a couple of slides here. Looking at the purple Ask a Question button, that's going to take you again to the My Questions tab. And please enter your full name. We want to see who's asking the question in case we can follow up. And then underneath that is where you type your question, and then see the airplane icon next to it. Hit the airplane icon. That's going to post your question. Our moderators are going to be looking at those questions, and they'll be publishing the ones that need responses, and they'll be replying individually, privately to you if you want a private response. So thank you for joining us today. We're going to begin in just a minute, and we have Mahalia Baldini, our state director, coming up, and Fabiana Ramirez, who will be talking about high school equivalency vouchers. So I'm going to turn it over to our interim state director. I see her.
Hello and good morning. How's everybody doing out there? So we are in our second session of the day. Welcome. If this is your first session during the summer business meeting that we're having, I had to go do things a little bit differently, of course, because in the rest of the sessions, our wonderful producers were able to advance slides, and I was like, I kind of like to go back and forth, and who knows. So I'm trying to take control. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen with you so that I can get us started here. Hopefully that worked out well. You guys let me know if it didn't. So welcome. Today we're going to be talking about in this session the Texas High School Equivalency Voucher Program. We first rolled this out earlier this year, and up first is going to be Fabiana Ramirez. She is our AEL policy person in our department, and she's been heavily involved in this from the very beginning. And she's going to go through just a couple of quick background and policy items before we get started. Fabiana?
Hi, good morning, everyone. It's nice to see y'all's virtual faces, and I hope this morning finds you well. So as Mahaly said, I'm just going to give kind of a review. In some of our biweekly calls, we kept you apprised of the legislation behind this high school equivalency subsidy program. So as we have some of you who may be new listening in, we just want to make sure everyone's on the same page as to having an understanding of the why we are doing this. So first here, quick background. This is going to answer hopefully the why are we doing this? What is the requirement? So House Bill 3, which was the 300-page bill for TEA's public school finance and public education bill, which was passed in this last 86th legislative session, had some language in there which added to the Texas Education Code a miscellaneous provision. And that provision here you'll see on the right side of your screen is called Subsidy for High School Equivalency Examination for Certain Individuals. It's just a few sentences here, but has a great impact for our students statewide. So what this did was add that into Texas statute. And what it does is require the Texas Education Agency, or TEA, to enter into a memorandum of understanding with TWC to transfer TWC funds for administering this high school equivalency subsidy program. So that's a mouthful. So I'm just going to start saying HSE. I think we all understand that's high school equivalency exam. So the requirements for TWC are to implement rules that state at a minimum the eligibility requirements and how we intend to implement this program. A couple of things I wanted to add. You see there, TEA had funded for the biennium, meaning 2020 and 2021, $1.5 million for this program. And in early February this year, TEA and TWC entered into that interagency agreement. So we are officially have an agreement in place, but there are still several steps we can do to put this in action. And Mahaly is going to get into those nuts and bolts because there's a lot to get this going. A couple of things I want to highlight in the bill is the eligibility requirements. So the eligibility is 21 years of age or older, and that will become very important as you all implement this locally. The other very important thing to outline here is it says this subsidy will pay up to the cost of one HSE exam. So whether you are taking the GED or the HiSET, which are the two approved high school equivalency exams for a student to then obtain the TextChase certificate, the full exam can either be comprised of either 4 individual tests or 5 individual tests. And because of that, there is a price variance from, I believe, $25 to $36.25, depending on which test you're taking and the manner in which you're taking it. But for a student and for our programs, we just want to make sure that the understanding is this subsidy will cover the cost of one full exam. Okay, so going on to the next slide. As I mentioned before, the legislation requires us, TWC, to implement rules. So as we just went over, the eligibility is 21 years of age of older, and we need to implement rules that further outline that and how we intend to implement this process. So for us as an agency, we have been going through this rules development process. And what that means for those of you that aren't as familiar with the different types of policy and statute and what the rules are, on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see there new rules in TAC Chapter 805. What TAC stands for is the Texas Administrative Code, and Chapter 805 is, we always refer to it as just the AEL rules. That is where we outline our statewide competition processes, things like professional development requirements and staff qualification requirements, and different types of requirements that are Texas specific. So in the TAC code, again, Texas Administrative Code, we are proposing a new subchapter that will further outline the eligibility and implementation of this process, which is the High School Equivalency Subsidy Program. So it's kind of hits a nail. They're very straightforward in terms of the title. Back in April, we had notified you all that a policy concept which flushed out at a high level what these rules in this new subchapter would look like, and that described the eligibility and how we intend to implement this, was posted in the Texas Register as a notice, and we offered the chance to send in public comments for that. So that was kind of stage one of the rules development process. We are now right into stage two, developing rules from before they are made final and make it into the Chapter 805 rules. It's a rather lengthy process. So we just want to keep you informed as to where we are. So right now we're about stage two, and we're in the proposed rules development stage. And what that means is, and you'll see that link on the left-hand side of your screen right there. I would say bookmark that, because that would be your page to go to see where can I send in comments and where can I see what these proposed rules look like. That is the link, and I believe we have a slide at the end here that's a quick resources, and you can just save that as well. So the comment period for these proposed rules will be sometime in September. September 14th is actually incorrect. It'll be a little later, but you'll have 30 days once these are posted in the Texas Register to review, get internally with your programs, and provide public comment. For them, we are required to respond to. So I really encourage you to do that. So moving on to what the proposed rules actually will say. If you can go back one slide, Mahalia. So once those rules get posted, again, you can go to that link, and a few things I want to highlight. What that says is eligibility. So we're required to further outline what the eligibility looks like. And of course, it's 21 years of age and older. We're requiring that these be Texas residents, and you'll see all that in the proposed rules. Well, you'll also notice here is that we are prioritizing AEL participants and AEL exiters within 365 days of exit. The reason being is we would anticipate these students would be test ready, and you know, once they have the subsidy in hand, more likely to pass and obtain that TexChase certificate. With that, though, there is flexibility to give this subsidy to non-AEL participants. And Mahalia will talk a little bit more what that looks like in terms of creating your local processes, you know, how you can get in referrals, refer a student who is coming in the door and wants a subsidy that may not be test ready, maybe referring them to the AEL program. But we'll get into that a little later. But there is flexibility. It's not just for AEL participants. It is also for individuals that are 21 years of age and older. So the next step here you'll see is a voucher allotment. We, in the next week or two, are hoping to take to the commission a discussion paper which outlines your voucher allotment. And the proposed rules say by September 1 of each year, the commission must approve a voucher allotment. What is a voucher? A voucher equals the cost of one individual test. Again, as the GED and the HiSET are comprised of either 4 or 5 tests, the voucher is up to the cost of one of those individual tests. Then we'll have the flexibility based on the usage locally, either mid-year or at another time, to do maybe a redistribution of those vouchers. So that's a lot, but I would recommend just bookmarking that proposed rule links there on your left-hand page. And once those proposed rules are up for public comment, reviewing those and sending in your comments to the email that is posted there, so we can see those and be thoughtful about how we respond and make sure we hear any sort of local challenges you anticipate we can address there. Going on to the next slide, this kind of tees up what Mahalia is going to be getting into the nuts and bolts about, which is I covered, from statute to implementation. We're kind of, implementing this rule development, but you'll see that's just kind of one step in terms of getting that subsidy into a student's hand. We have to do step 2, which is finalizing contracts with GED and HiSET, again, which are the 2 vendors for the high school equivalency exam here in Texas. How we are going to implement this program locally, and Mahaly will get into that with you all shortly. Getting commission approval on the high school equivalency voucher distribution. Again, we hope to do that in the next week or 2 here, and we'll let you all know as soon as that is approved by the commission what that looks like for your individual programs. And then either mid-year or a few months down the line, looking at the usage of these vouchers and seeing based on demand if there is a need to do a redistribution. So a lot of steps, but I'm going to hand it off to Mahaly so we can talk about locally. How are we going to implement this locally? So hopefully that helps. If you have any questions on the background or the rules or the legislation, feel free to pop in a question in the chat box there.
Thanks, Fabiana. So a couple of things before I get started here on my end that I wanted to point out. The first thing is that we had put the resources for today's session on the TCAL website. So if you haven't went there to pull down the resources, I highly encourage it. We've put a high school equivalency process map on there, which is really what I will be breaking down today. It's not the first time you guys have seen this, but it's just going to be something, handy to have up on your second monitor, I think, as we kind of walk through some things. The other thing is this session, I think, is actually scheduled to go up till 12 o'clock. We made it a little bit longer because as we go through this, my goal is that you guys are really thinking about this in terms of your local process development and running the traps on your end. And as you're doing that in your brains, as we go through this, if you have a question that you feel is just a very important question in order for you to develop local process, I want you to put that in the Q&A. So we've kind of extended this time a little bit so that we can get all of your questions in the Q&A. Some of them we will, get through today and we'll be able to answer kind of on the spot. Some of them we may not be able to get through, but what the goal is for all the sessions for the summer business meeting is to take these Q&As, put them into an actual document, and then we will send something out for each session in like one document, but it outlines each session's Q&A so that you guys can get some, definitive responses on all the questions that you're asking. So don't be shy. I know most of you are not, but I'm just throwing that out there because that's really the goal for today. So thanks, Fabiana, for going over, statute to implementation. I'm going to kind of talk about, a little bit more about where we are and some next steps, and then what does this local process look like, and what are we developing and thinking through on our end, and what does that ultimately mean for you as a provider implementing a local process. So these are just some basic stages of implementation, and Fabiana has covered some of them. This is typically where we've been for the last couple of months here. It's been a slower process than what we wanted, but there's a lot of things going on right now within the agency as well related to COVID and some other priorities. So it's just one of those things. We're going to keep on it, and we keep the wheels moving, and we're going to continue to work very diligently towards getting this out to you. So we're in contracts development stages with GED and with our TextChase vendors right now. That's just the internal process that we have to go through once the contracts are signed. We also have to make sure that on our end at the state level that we have an internal process for paying those vendors and reconciling all the data, because as you can imagine, this is going to be a lot of individual transactional purchases. So not easy, but we want to make sure we're being very compliant, and we're very grateful for TEA for the money, and we need to create that paper trail for them so they know exactly how we're spending it. So what we are really going to focus on primarily for today is this stage 4, which is the implementation and rollout. At the provider level, giving you guys access to what we're thinking this is going to look like, what can you kind of expect in the coming weeks as we button up this process, and start to think and really plan locally. So in stage 4, we basically have 3 steps. And these are really steps that are taken by both us at the TWC level, but also things that are going to be happening at the local level, which is why we're trying to get this messaging out there. So the step 1 is dissemination of guidance. That's on us. So we are in the process and the throes of developing an AEL letter. And you know that in our AEL letters, you are going to see terms like no local flexibility, which means that is a requirement. And then you will have some things where you will have local flexibility as a grantee as well. So that's the first step, is disseminating that guidance so you guys know exactly what you're sort of on the hook for when you're developing your SOPs locally. The second thing, again, local procedures. The purposes of today, and as we kind of go through this process map, my goal is that I can really highlight, hey, this is going to be a local procedure that you need to think about and plan for. And that's going to be the cue for you guys to start thinking about what that really looks like, you know, for you. The next step is going to be the actual voucher distribution. As Fabiana said, right now we're currently slated to take that, I believe, on August 4th, which is next week. The month has gotten away from us. So next week, and at that particular meeting, the discussion paper and the decision points for our commissioners are twofold. The first one is the actual voucher distribution allotments, which means how many vouchers you guys locally will be getting per grantee. The second part of that decision points for them is the fact that we are requesting, and that staff is recommending, that we allow local providers to basically create a procedure for serving non-AEL participants. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we start to go through, you know, the individual process map. The second thing there is going to be the voucher reconciliation. So after the distribution happens and we get that out, the commission approves it, we're able to send out a tracker. It's going to have all the vouchers codes listed in the tracker. Then you have the voucher reconciliation piece, which is on you guys. As you're using those vouchers, you will be reconciling them on the tracker. The third step, which is always everybody's favorite, is the oversight and the monitoring of all of these processes. And obviously the reporting of the vouchers back to us, and then us also reporting to TEA about how we're using this great resource that they have given us. So that's kind of in a nutshell where we are, and some things that are coming down the pipeline that you can expect. So start those juices flowing and start getting those questions in, because here we go. So local process, what can you really expect in future guidance? The first thing I want you guys to look at, if you've got your high school equivalency process map up, I want to go over this key with you really quick. You're going to see in the bottom right corner of each individual process, you're going to see a key. The particular one that I want you to pay attention on is the one that says P equals provider. Because if you're looking at the process map, and it'll look something like this, if you're looking at this process map, what you'll notice is in the very right-hand bottom corner of each steps of those process, it has an identifier of kind of who does this, who's responsible for this. And if you see a P, then you know that that is something that you are going to see likely in our AEL letter that is a no local flexibility, that we are going to ask that you create a process around this. So that's just a good indication kind of as we move through this today. It'll help kind of frame some things up for you and hopefully get you to a place where you want to ask some good questions for us. So again, if you, I just want to, before we go any further, if you don't have this currently, you can go to the TW or the TCAL website. If you don't know how to get there, just type in TCAL Summer Business Meeting, and it'll pull up a pathway to the agenda, and the materials are in there. So we'll be focusing on two of the process that we have today. There's obviously a whole other process that has to do with reconciling and transactional purchasing and all that stuff, but that's really at the state level. Today we're going to focus on the business process and also the student process. So first up is the business process. So step one in the business process is really the voucher distribution. TWC is going to distribute the vouchers to you based on historical usage. Now, what I'll say about the historical usage so that we're very transparent with what this means is we are looking at test taker data from February of 2019 through February of 2020. And we are looking at how many actual tests have occurred at each individual grantee. We're taking that and saying, as a state, that makes up 100% of the whole. So if you're Amarillo College, maybe you had 2.5% of all the tests that were taken in the state of Texas during that time frame. And that's how we're deciding and making some determinations on how the voucher distribution will happen. If you're curious and want to know, again, for transparency purposes, you can go and look at the materials as they're posted for the August 4th commission meeting, and you can see exactly, what's coming. It will be in the AEL letter, but if you want an early glance, you can look there. So we're going to take this historical usage and we're going to use that as a determination for the actual voucher distribution, and that's on us. The second part in the business process is the test taker attains a student ID. So once you have the vouchers distributed to you at the local level and you have your allotment, you now have to have in your process a way that we are going to track these students. All students, whether they are current, former, or non-AEL participants, all will need a Teams ID number. That's going to be something that's going to be very crucial in the process when you go to register this individual to take their test, because we are asking you to put it in the registration process so that we can then track those individuals much easier on the back end when we reconcile the vouchers. So there's going to be two methods. One, let's just say this is a current or a former participant and they already have a Teams ID number. That's great. Or you can create a Teams ID number for a non-participant. And the way that works is you don't have to do a PEARL, you don't have to do an enrollment form, but you will have to come up with a process that's going to give you the minimum elements needed to create a Teams ID number. And for those of you who know Teams very well, these are going to be what is currently in Teams as personal contact or personal information. This is going to be the student's name. This is going to be their date of birth. It's going to be their, it may ask you for the SSN or a driver's license number. But again, there are options in the system to say, oh, the person didn't want to provide that. The key is you have to create that student record. You don't have to create a profile for a student. We're not going to ask you to get all that PEARL information for non-AEL participants that may be coming into the system, but you will need to at least generate a student ID for them. The next step is the test taker earns a voucher. And what do we really mean by earns a voucher? And this has to do with, again, we are going to be requiring a test readiness procedure at the local level. So if a student says, wants to take a high school equivalency exam, and they say, oh, I'm ready to take an exam, we are going to have a requirement to ensure that the student is test ready at the local level. That could be a practice test. Right now, if you are going through GED and you're wanting to do a remote test through GED, they are requiring a green ready status to do remote testing anyway. But we are going to say these vouchers are precious, and we want to make sure that individuals getting them are really ready to go and be successful in their exam. So that is a part in terms of a local process that you guys will have to create some parameters and some procedures around for people that are coming in, regardless of whether they are current or former AEL participants, or if it's just someone coming into the system that maybe have not had our services before, and we're saying those are these non-AEL participants. We are still going to require a test readiness process. After that is determined, what we're saying here is the director logs the student on the TWC form and supplies the team's ID and distributes the voucher number. And this is really more about the local process for doing the reporting. So we're saying director here. That could be someone that you are designating at the local level, that this is going to be the individual or individuals who are going to be responsible for the transaction of getting that voucher number to that particular student and ensuring that it gets tracked appropriately at the local level. For those of you that may have smaller programs, you know, that may be an easier task if you have limited sites and smaller programs. For those of you that have large programs with a lot of sites and a lot of tentacles, you're going to have to be very thoughtful about this process as you develop it locally. Registration, we're saying the instructor registers the student and adds the team's ID during the registration process. This is actually a very important piece in the puzzle. When the student goes into GED.com, for instance, and registers to take a test and schedules a test, and they go through this checkout procedure, what we're wanting them to do is to ensure that they use their team's ID number, and GED has been worked with us to ensure that there is a spot on the profile that the student can enter their team's ID. It actually says team's ID or team's participant ID or something. And it actually is going to have a place for that in a field for us to report that. So what we're saying really is this needs to be very controlled. Providing, oh, here's a voucher number to a student, here's the number, go register on your own, go schedule something on your own. We're not recommending that. We're really recommending that there is some sort of direct involvement from you guys to make sure that when the student goes through the registration process and the scheduling process, that we're there to kind of walk them through that. And I think many of you are already doing that. So the next part of the process is the redemption. So the test taker redeems the voucher, and the test center is going to check the student ID, which is often, a Texas driver's license or a Texas ID. During this particular time, so when the test taker redeems the voucher, which typically is going to happen at the registration, those of you who are familiar with the way that GED scheduling works, and we're getting much more familiar with it here at the state level, going through this process, is that when they register and when they schedule, they go through a checkout. And at that point, that is when the voucher is going to be redeemed through the system. So it is actually going to go and be put into the system before the individual goes to sit for a test. It actually happens during the scheduling and registration process. Billing, the way this works is the vendor is going to receive notice that the voucher's been used. And then it's going to bill us. It's basically going to send us, a giant list of all the vouchers that have come through, and we are going to then pay those vouchers on the back end here at the TWC level. We will be reviewing those vouchers as we're getting them from GED and reviewing all of those voucher numbers in going into Teams and actually making sure that the participant that, GED says that voucher number is attached to is actually being tracked in Teams. So that's another part in terms of the reconciliation piece. This is why a couple of months ago, you guys will remember that we added a support service page in Teams, and it was just for this, so that when you go and you provide this voucher number to a student, you will track it on an actual form tracker that we send to you, but you will also track it in Teams under supportive services. So when we get this this list from our vendor that says these are the vouchers that are used, we're going to be able to reconcile that in our system prior to paying the vendor. So it's just another little piece in the puzzle here in terms of how all of that works. So it's a little complicated process. Of course, the last thing is, we're going to pay the vendor, and that, of course, is going to happen. I'm going to pause for just a minute and let you guys catch up. Do we have a lot of questions that are coming in? If somebody could just look and tell me, that would be great.
Hi, Mahalia.
Yeah.
We have received several, and I've been trying to answer as you've been presenting. So I don't know if you want to open up the published Q&A and just go through a couple of those.
Actually, Fabiana, if there's some that you have, if you'll just verbally tell me. I'm afraid to move my screen. I'm afraid I'll be able to get back to it or something.
Okay, well, we had Tiffany and I think a couple other folks asking, okay, what does this cost really cover? So to clarify, the legislation says this subsidy will cover up to the cost of one full exam. So the vouchers do not equate the full cost of the exam. A voucher, as Mahalia was talking about, when you go into GED or HiSET and enter your voucher coupon code, that'll cover the individual test. However, the student will have up to the full cost of the exam. So if it's HiSET or GED, the full battery, if that clarifies. And I think maybe Joe Arrington had another question of, are we talking about subtests or full battery? So your subsidy will cover up to the full battery, which is then comprised of either 4 or 5 subtests, if that clarifies that. Other question we have is, once September 1 rolls around, can we use these vouchers? As Mahalia said, we have a couple more steps. Even when we get these vouchers allotments approved by the commission, we need to just confirm that the vendor contracts with GED and HiSET are executed. So we will notify you when these vouchers are ready to use and in your hand, and outline that in our AEL letter policy on this. We had a question from Marcus from Grayson North Central. Will the local workforce board also be provided to potential customers, or will this only go through AEL programs? So very good question. The proposed rules state that the AEL grantee is responsible for managing this and implementing this locally. And as Mahalia's process map goes, if you look at step 2, the unique ID has clarification there on how to get this subsidy for non-AEL participants, which also relates to a question Michelle had entered about if we have a non-AEL customer coming in the door wanting the subsidy and they go into Teams, will they count against our performance or go in the denominator? And the answer is no, but you are responsible for any non-AEL participant or exeter receiving the subsidy, creating that profile in Teams for them so that you can get that unique ID. And that is very important for the reconciliation process and tracking who has received this subsidy. And I think that covers everything so far. Do we have to supply non-AEL, Oscar Garcia from Southwest Texas Junior College, do we have to supply non-AEL participants a voucher? Or can we make it a requirement to enroll to draw down a voucher? That's a good question. And Mahalia, I don't know if you want to answer that. I think we covered that it is a good opportunity to enroll any non-AEL participants who would benefit from AEL services into your program. And we are going to be requiring in this AEL letter that locally you create processes to provide that subsidy to non-AEL participants.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And likely when the AEL letter comes out, you'll see some information just about what the local flexibility is on that particular topic. And it's really going to be your local policy. I think from our side, we're going to basically say you can't turn people away. However, you may be able to create a local policy that says within, you know, certain confines of whatever the voucher distribution you have left, the priority as written in the rule or in the proposed rules right now is for current or former AEL participants. So Oscar, I would just, when the letter comes out, look what we put in there, because that's one of the kind of hotter topics going around right now. In particular, as we wait right now for UB Authority, there just may be more flexibility in the future to where we can really open this up. And we'll just have, you know, a lot of money to spend towards individuals. So I would just say, look for future guidance on that one.
And one more question I'm seeing here is regarding what data are you using on the historical test taking data? So to clarify there, we are basing that on AEL participant test taking data, not test taking data for your workforce area or for your testing centers. This is based on data we obtained from teams to see how many individual high school equivalency tests were taken from February of 2019 to February of 2020. Because we understand that we are in a unique situation here with the pandemic and a lot of the test taking having moved to remote proctoring, we are really going to take advantage of the flexibility noted in the proposed rules about reevaluating the demand and usage of these vouchers to perhaps then do a redistribution.
And I will just say too, on that one question, one of the little kind of nuance there's that I wanted to point out, you guys may remember back in, I believe it was March, we had been working on our data match process with TEA. And part of that was to support this as much as it is anything else in terms of your exit-based measures like credentials and just high school equivalency that we just weren't receiving. So that actually happened in March. These numbers, even though the data that we are pulling is from February of 2019 through February 2020, these numbers weren't pulled until April. So these were done after all that cleanup happened, after we went through and scrubbed all of the data match processes. And what many of you probably noticed, if you haven't already, it's a beautiful thing, is that we were able to clear out all the potential matches. Now, what does that really mean? What that means is that we were able to go in and through that data fix that we did back in March, we were able to really line up all those test scores that we have received from TEA, all of the high school equivalency exam credentials that we received from TEA, and assign those to participants in our system. So even though the test taker data is from a certain period of time, just know that that cleanup activity really helped us to get everything and feel very comfortable about using that data set in terms of determining the distribution. So I just wanted to make that kind of clear. Any other questions? If not, I'm going to go on to the next section here. Really good questions. Keep them coming.
Yeah. Lots of other questions, and even if we don't get to them here, so Mahaly can finish this presentation, we'll make sure to review these to include them and address them in our AEL letter. But just to highlight, non-AEL participants, which you are entering and creating a profile in Teams for, will not be counted for your performance. You are simply creating a Teams profile to then obtain that unique identifier so that we can track usage of the vouchers. And a few people have asked about that, but I hope that's clear.
Yeah, and this is going to be my opportunity to tell you guys, when it comes to performance, we're looking at 12 contact hours before they hit any of your performance. That means that you have to do a full Pearl, you have to enroll them in a class, you have to do an assessment, you have to get them in class and participating for 12 contact hours. Before they would hit any of your performance. And that is not what we are going to require for individuals coming in that, aren't currently in the system receiving those types of services from us. We're basically going to say, you're going to fill out and give us, basic contact information so that we can create a record for who we're giving this money to, who we're giving this voucher to, and we're going to make sure that you're ready to take this test through like a GED official practice test or a HiSET official practice test, so that we know that we're giving this voucher to someone that's actually ready. Those are really the two requirements that we're talking about. So and then if they don't pass their practice exam, that's a good opportunity for us to say, hey, this is what we do, right? Let me tell you more about, the test prep that we can offer you. And then at that point, if they're wanting to enroll in the program, then yes, they would have to do the Pearl, they would have to do, an assessment and come into the program. And at that point, you would want to make them an official AEL student. So just wanted to kind of clarify that point. So keep the questions coming. I'm going to go ahead and start this second process because it'll probably get some more good dialogue going. And just a reminder, we have, I think, until 12 o'clock for today's session. So we've got time. And my plan is to hang out even after we're done with this all the way up till 12 o'clock so that I can answer, the questions that you guys have coming in. So let's talk about what this process looks to the student. And this may help to answer some of the questions that that Fabiana is going to go into the Q&A and try to answer. So let's review what this process really is going to look like to the student, or what we foresee the process looking like for the student. So the first step is always going to be, and again, you see a little P there, this is going to be on you guys to make sure that the student is eligible. Because in House Bill 3, which is the statute that is, making all of this possible, it specifically says 21 years of age and a Texas resident, then that is the eligibility criteria that it has to be met for you to provide someone with a voucher. So that is going to be, again, just a local SOP requirement for you. So definitely put that on the on your process map. Qualified. So step 2, again, we've kind of talked about this, and you're going to, if you think about this from an extent of creating a local policy and how are you really going to determine test readiness, we are going to have here's the thing. We want to create flexibility for you guys at the local level, and not put so strict of parameters on this that, you feel like you're in a chokehold. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we're being good stewards of this funds, and we want to make sure that the individuals that are receiving the voucher are ready to actually take a test. So this means that you have someone who's interested or that's ready to take a high school equivalency exam, and maybe they've been attending class and the instructor is notifying you like, hey, this person is ready, I really feel like they're ready, and they're going to meet that readiness requirement before they receive the voucher. So we'll have some of this kind of cribbed out in the AEL letter that's coming out. But again, our goal is to create some local flexibility on what exactly that looks like there locally, whether you want to implement a specific teacher referral for all of your current AEL participants. If you want to get that detailed, you can get that detailed. It's going to follow the same sort of guidelines that we always follow when we're talking about compliance, which is TWC, and what we put in our AEL letter is going to be the gold standard. If you want to go platinum, you can go platinum. But that local process and that local SOP is what you're going to get held to when it comes to the fact when we go out and monitor against this. So just kind of keep that in mind. And if you have any specific questions about that, put them in the Q&A so that we can answer them. So student process step number 3, the test taker earns the contact hours and is deemed ready to test by the instructor. Again, we put this in there because this may be part of your local process that you put in place. Like, hey, we're not going to just give these to anybody. We want to create a local process that says this test taker has earned these contact hours and or has taken this official GED practice test, and we're saying that they are ready to actually get a voucher and sit and be scheduled and ready. The instructor can request the voucher from their local AEL director. So again, if you are thinking about a process locally that you're trying to create, how do you get the word out to your instructors and to your students that this is something that is available? That is something that in terms of when you're building your process, you have to have a clear line of communication between your instructor level staff and your coordinator level staff and your administrative director level staff, so that you have a process for getting that instructor and that student that is working with that instructor up to the point and the place where the director or the supervisor or the designated person can then go through this business process that we just talked about in the last slides, which is, okay, they have to take this, this readiness test. Okay, then we're going to issue the voucher. We're going to schedule them on GED.com, get them scheduled for a test and get them registered, or whatever that process looks like. But that's kind of what we're talking about here when we're saying, what is going to be that mechanism in your process that's going to allow that instructor to request a voucher for a student. And then redemption for the student, it's very similar to how it is on the business side of things. The test taker is going to go in when they register, they're going to redeem the voucher. Use the voucher, kind of is going to work like a coupon code. I think most of us are probably familiar with how that works by now. When they go through the checkout procedure, they are going to use that voucher code, and it is going to be worth a certain amount of money. And that's the way that this is, sort of set up to where they can easily use it during checkout. And it's basically going to pay for the cost of whatever that exam is. The cost of the exam, the cost of potential test center fees, and any of the other applicable fees that are, existing when that student goes through the checkout process. So the last two processes here are kind of what I was talking about before we got started, which is really determining need for additional instruction based off of the score results. So let's just say the student goes through this process, they use the voucher, they take their test, and maybe they don't pass, or maybe they score just slightly lower than passing. Then at that point in time, what we really would like to see is a process where we are engaging the student that does not pass, or a student that does pass, and having a process for what is the next step at that point. So if a student doesn't pass, what is going to be your local process for getting that student back into the door and maybe making them either go back through some additional prep work, or again, if they came in as a non-AEL participant, coming back and actually enrolling in AEL services at that point in time. If they're a person that comes and they take their test and they do pass, the question is, are they ready for the next one? And if so, do they need to come back into AEL services to study for that math exam? Do they need to come back and, continue studies to get them to the next test? So those are all things that for your local processes, you're going to want to ensure that you have something going on at the end of the testing process for the students, regardless of whether they passed the text chase test or they didn't, because by and by, many times that student is still going to be in the process of testing, either prepping for the next test or needing to come back in and, you know, get services for us so that they can pass the next exam. So be thinking about that as well. We have come into this and kind of said, we really want to do this so that we can serve these individuals. We know times are lean. We know that, you know, paying for tests is also, you know, often a hindrance for people getting their high school equivalency exam taken care of. We want to do that, but we also want to make sure that we're not just sending kind of folks out there to say, oh, well, you know, you didn't make it this time. Good luck next time. Because as Fabiana was saying earlier, we basically have up into the cost of one full exam per student that you can pay for. Now that is a tricky situation for you guys, because you are going to have to track how many vouchers, you know, Jimmy Don has gotten. And you are going to have to make sure that it does not exceed the cost of one full exam. And this is the other little nuance there. And I want to make sure that this is clear, but this is a little nuanced here. If Jimmy Don comes in and takes his math test and he does not pass, and he needs to use his second voucher to take a math test because he's used up all of his retakes, for instance, or whatever the situation is, he can do that. But he's only going to get a total of 4 or 5, depending on whether he is taking a GED or he is taking a high set. He's only going to get a specific number of vouchers. So we have to kind of keep that in mind, and you will have to keep that in mind when we are tracking this at the local level. And that's why it's important to put all of this in Teams so that you can go in and check Jimmy Don in Teams and see, oh, I've already given you 3 vouchers. You know, you're only going to get 2 more, or you're only going to get 1 more. So you want to really make sure that you're being very diligent there in terms of your local processing. So I'm going to stop before we kind of talk about what's next. And kind of wrap this thing up and see, Fabiana, is there any other questions that have come in?
Yes, we have a lot, and rather than respond to each of the individual ones, I think we can kind of lump these up into topics. So some questions here on retest. Are retests covered? And I think Mahali had just touched upon that, where it is the cost of a full exam is what a student can get. So yes, depending on how many subjects and how many retests that student has taken, as long as it doesn't exceed the, I think for GED is $36.25, then the voucher can cover a retest cost. But again, this is where the tracking and making sure, you know, that that student is ready to take that test falls on to, you know, you all. We want to make sure the subsidy is going to individuals that we believe are, and that you believe are ready to take the test. So that is why it's important to have those processes in place. Anything else for that?
Yeah, on that one in particular, one thing, and this is something that you know, during contract negotiations and working with vendors that we are very cognizant of, things get a little weird because all of a sudden when the pandemic hit and they had to start developing, you know, remote proctored tests, there was a little shift there in terms of free retakes. Because, you know, for GED, they used to have an option for free retakes when they took a specific test. You take a math exam and you fail, there used to be some free retakes. So we're being very diligent in our contracts to say that we're not going to use and pay for something that should be free. So that is something else, you know, that you'll see in guidance, and that's really up at the vendor level. But yeah, that's a really good point. So what we're saying is, if the student is in a situation where GED is saying, okay, you're not eligible for any free retakes because of X, Y, and Z, then yes, we can use an additional voucher to pay for a retake exam. That's going to be allowable. But what we want to do, again, and what you guys want to do at the local level, is ensuring that the student is getting, you know, what's owed to them based off of the vendor's, you know, business requirements. So if they're doing a face-to-face test, and you'll have to check with TEA and the vendor to really see, like, what is the latest and greatest on all of this, you know, information in regards to retakes. But we just want to be good stewards, if that makes sense. So if the student can get a free one, we don't want to use a voucher, I guess is what I'm saying. Good questions, though.
Really good questions here. Other ones to clarify, we've gotten a couple of these. What is the subsidy covering the cost of? To clarify, this is to cover the actual GED and or HiSET tests, not the GED ready test. Now, when thinking about that, you know, I think we all have an understanding, you know, the paying for a GED or HiSET exam has been unallowable for our AEL program. So this is why we are putting this on our AEL programs to implement locally, because it's such a good opportunity to use this. You know, we know it's been a challenge for, you know, maybe some individual customers who can't pay for the full GED exam, and this has not been allowed use of AEL funds. So this is helping with that. In terms of GED ready test, this subsidy does not cover the cost of a test readiness test.
And Fabiana, were they specifically talking about like test center fees and administrative fees, or did they?
No.
Okay.
Susan Gussler, are you funding the practice test GED ready? Kathy Dowdy, sounds like we need to use AEL funds to implement those. And I think another associate from Region 9, are we not paying for the actual test and we are only paying for actual tests and not ready tests, correct? So just confirming, yes. This is not paying for the readiness test. This is for the actual tests themselves.
And I want to take a moment to put this out there, and I'll double check on this, but I believe that the policy for the GED the practice exams, you can pay for those out of your regular AFLA money. It's just the actual GED exam and the course exam that were prohibited. So I think there's some programs out there, and guys, if you're one of those programs that have been paying for the GED practice or the HiSET official practice exams, if you want to, you know, jump in there on the Q&A and kind of, you know, let folks reach out to you in terms of what that process looks like for you, if you've implemented that, that would be great.
Okay.
Here, Sharon.
Other questions here regarding Texas residency. How do you prove they're a Texas resident? We have, must they have a Texas driver's license or ID? We are going to put that policy in the AEL letter. And Mahali, I don't know if there's anything more on how we anticipate requiring the Texas residency eligibility.
No, what we will do is we'll align to whatever it is that TEA requires or the test centers are requiring for residency. There's a couple of things on there, I think, driver's license, Texas ID card, and I think there's a couple of other items that are listed on there as being acceptable documentation for residency. So that's what we'll be looking and aligning to.
And let's see what else. I think those are kind of the big ones.
Really good questions. Yeah, the GED, you know, paying for the GED official practice or the HiSET official practice test. If somebody wants to actually, well, never mind, because I'll get like 50 of them. What I'll do is I'll send this through to our fiscal TA folks, and I'll have Kara on our team just send that in as a general question through fiscal TA so that we can get you an actual cribbed out response. But we've went through this before, and what it boiled down to is that is considered an assessment of a student. Even though it's a non-NRS approved assessment, it still falls under assessment in terms of the language. I believe that's how it worked out. So we can go ahead and send that through, and that way you guys are comfortable. So to free up some of your AFLA dollars or your combined funding to pay for those practice or those test readiness opportunities for students.
Mm-hmm. One other batch of questions regarding Teams tracking. Are we able to track these codes in Teams? And separate but related, can we see across providers voucher usage for a student?
Good question. So yes, you can track them in Teams. There's a new tab on each individual participants called supportive services, and that is where you would track them. For the actual report, this is something that we are going to put a bug in so that in the future you will be able to just go in and pull like a support service report. And you will be able to filter it at the provider level, etc. Right now, this is something we're going to have to depend on DOI to do for us, likely from the tables, which is why we built a new page so that we could have back-end tables so that we could pull this information. Whether they're going to be able to do that at the provider level before we get an actual Teams report, I don't know that, but I can find out for you guys. I don't know how simple of a process that is for our DOI folks.
Hey, Mahalia.
Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to bring back up one of the residency question because it seems to be pretty prevalent. How they're asking how residency will be established, but also students' question is that they have a ton of DACA HSE students coming in. Are they ineligible if they don't have a Texas ID?
I can answer that, Lori. So I just put in the chat the eligibility requirements for high school equivalency testing per the TEA website. So as Mahalia said, we are going to align our policy to this because if a student's not meeting the requirements outlined by TEA, then they wouldn't be able to take the test anyways. Therefore, we wouldn't, subsidize that exam cost. So if you all are able to click on that webpage, you'll see there for the proof of residency in Texas, it says which could be 3 options: a Texas driver's license, a utility bill showing the Texas address, or a bank statement showing the Texas address.
Good clarification. Thanks, Fabiana. So, yeah, we wouldn't be any more stringent or than what TEA has in terms of determining that. So we will align to their policy. Any other questions? I think I just have a couple more slides here to go through, and then I think we'll be done. Keep the questions coming in, though. Like I said, I'm going to leave the live feed kind of open and leave the chat open up until 12 o'clock today so that you guys can continue to put questions in there, and we'll continue to look through those questions and answer them. So even though the presentation is over, we'll continue to update the Q&A up until 12 o'clock. And then we will send all of the questions with the answers out after the business meeting sessions have concluded. It will probably take us a week or so to do that, but that will be coming out to you at a later date. So what's next? Here's what's next. We have TWC guidance that's going to be coming out. We have an AEL letter. I've mentioned it several times throughout the course of today's presentation. We were also working on a high school equivalency guide. After talking with Fabiana, we said, well, maybe we just put this in a letter or we put it in a guide, but we don't do both because it might be overkill for you guys. So it's probably going to be an AEL letter that you're going to see coming out from us. You'll also have something that is something else we've referenced a couple of times today, which is this distribution. This is going to be a local tracker. And for those of you who were at Taylor back in February, we gave you kind of a draft look about what that tracker is going to look like. It's a very simple tracker for you to put all of your vouchers that are being used and being redeemed in there. It's going to come to you pre-filled with all of your voucher numbers, and then you guys can utilize those voucher numbers and actually track which ones are being used once you get them. And then Fabiana mentioned you can expect that we will have a mid-year. We're saying mid-year. It could be at any time. We plan on kind of looking at things on a monthly or quarterly basis as we move forward through this year, just to make sure that the usage is aligning to need and vice versa, so that we can make sure that the vouchers are getting to individuals that are, utilizing them. Because our goal is that, we want to, get these spent down and utilize this resource that TEA has given us. And then for oversight and reporting, we're going to constantly be improving on this process over the next year. This is a new thing for us. We don't have any unrealistic expectations that it's going to be perfect right out of the gate. There may be things that in the course between having and developing policy with you, local flexibility for you, and also the business end of things at the state level between the vendor and our actual accounts payable department, and reconciling all of that in the middle, which is us, that we will probably need to update some processes moving forward. So I would expect that that's going to happen. Hopefully we have ran the traps through this whole process, enough times that we're feeling very comfortable, but you just never know. So we'll constantly be improving on the process. And then the transactional tracking and reporting, we have to report back to TEA of what we're doing with these vouchers and sort of what the results and what has culminated as a result of this partnership. So we have to collect all the data, we have to reconcile everything, and then we have to report back to our partners because we really want to say, this is a great thing, keep giving it to us. Because again, in the statute, this is for the biennium, so it's for 2 years. Of course, we've had COVID, we've had just numerous things that have happened over the course of that time. So we just want to make sure that we're sending a clear message that this is something that we want, in the future, and we want to show that how successful it's been. So real quick, just some resources. Fabiana mentioned this at the very beginning of the presentation. If you want to take a list at the rules and the pending proposed rules that we have, there's a link there. There's also a link for the Texas Education Agency's TextChase page. If you want to find out more information, again, to look at how they deem residency and sort of what their processes are for test centers and all of that, they've got some really great information on there. And then for the TCAL webpage, we've included this COVID AEL link as well, which you guys are very familiar with that resource as well. So keep the questions coming in. We're going to keep this open. I wanted to thank everybody for joining us today and kind of being available to get your questions to us. It helps us to kind of get those questions in so that we can ensure that when we are writing this AEL letter and we are getting guidance out, that we are trying to, hit on all those questions and really answer things in a very specific way when we do our policy. So you know exactly what the expectation is from you. So thanks for joining us. Thank you to Fabiana for assisting, and then all the producers and things happening on the back end. Thank you guys so much. This has been such a great experience the last couple of days. It's went very smoothly, and that's due to their wonderful prep and all the work that's went into it. Keep asking questions. We're going to hang on the line here for another 20 minutes or so. To the rest of you that are bugging out on us, have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow. Starting our session at, I think, 9 a.m. and we are going to be talking about program updates. So we'll see you guys then. Have a great lunch. Have a great day.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Can you clarify if we will need to just put in the personal info or add a profile in Teams?
It'll just be their personal info. So when I say profile in Teams, I know Fabiana said profile earlier. What she means is you'll have to create a participant record. So you have to create a participant record, but you will not have to do a PURL, which means you will not have to add an actual participant profile in Teams.
Molly, we've had a couple of different questions regarding if you have a student coming in the door that only needs, let's say, 3 tests out of the full battery, or maybe just 1. What happens to the remaining individual vouchers?
Good question. So they're eligible for other students. So we are very aware, and this was one of the reasons why we decided to do the vouchers based off individual test cost and not the cost of a full exam. Because we knew that whenever we kicked this off, we would have people that were coming in that maybe they've already had their first 2. Maybe they paid for them out of pocket and they really only need us to pay for the last 2. And that's perfectly fine. So don't think of this so much as every student gets 5, individual tests. Think of it as every student has a maximum of, 4 or 5 tests that they can take. That you may not use every student may not need that many. So they just stay kind of in your allotment and they're just going to be in there for use for another student.
Another question we've gotten from a couple of folks is, can we see if another provider has given the student a voucher already?
Wait, can you say that one more time? Sorry.
Will we be able to see if a provider has given the student a voucher already?
Well, you will have to, this is going to be part of your local process, which will be, this is the reason why we're having you track it in Teams. So that regardless of whether that student starts out in Dallas and ends up in Houston, or starts out in Abilene and ends up in Howard College, you should always go in and check the student record and check their support services page to see if they've been issued any vouchers. Because those will be tracked in Teams, which means you will have access to that information. So that's going to be part of this building out this local process, is you want to do your research for the student when they come in.
I'm looking through, and Lori, there's another team member that sees a question we haven't addressed. Feel free to ask it. We had a question, so if we are providing the subsidy for a student that's not an AEL participant, can we pay for their GED ready with our funds? If they're not an AEL participant, I'm not sure how to answer that.
That's a really good question. I don't know if I'll be able to answer that today, actually, but that's a really good question, and that may be one that when we send these out and when I go through fiscal TA, I'll make sure that I include that as a subset question.
Pat Culpepper just asked about the local tracker. Is this something AEL creates, or is this part of the TWC system like Teams? So Pat, good question. We will be sending out a tracker, which is kind of similar to the PASSIS tracker, an Excel file for which you can track a student's usage of those vouchers. So that's what we mean by the local tracker. And we did, if you attended the February business meeting that was prior to Taylor, I believe that was in Dallas, life before COVID. We did a quick presentation on what that looked like. So we're still finalizing that, but that's what we mean by local tracker. Oscar Garcia, and I believe someone else, a couple folks had asked this. If you issue a voucher to a student, but they do not redeem it. So we are, because a voucher is going to be considered quote unquote redeemed when that student enters it in their the shopping cart page. So if they're registering for a GED test and they enter that voucher code and hit you know, their coupon code and they hit save, at that point that voucher is considered redeemed. So we are going to highly encourage or potentially require that when you are handing out these subsidies, vouchers to your students, that you are with them, scheduling it within a short amount of time from which they're actually registering for that test and from when they're actually planning to go take it, to kind of prevent that. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to say something about that, because here's the thing that we have to remember from an accountability standpoint. And this is the reason why likely when you see this AEL letter come out, we may have no local flexibility on this. These vouchers are considered live and active from the moment you get them. So that means if you give, you know, your student a voucher code, what we want to make sure is that that's the student that's going to use that voucher. They're not going to take it and give it to their cousin. They're not going to take it and give it to their sister. They're not going to take that voucher code and, you know, give it to someone else. It's for them, because that should be part of the local process. So typically what we would not suggest and would not recommend is just giving a voucher code to a student and saying, hey, here's a voucher code, you know, go register with GED.com or go register for HiSET exam. What we would really want to say is, okay, we've done X, Y, and Z to determine your readiness. Let's go ahead and get you set up, and you're going to have a person, an individual that student can contact that's going to schedule this for them and walk them through the process of using the voucher code. Because what you'll either have is you'll give them a code and they maybe won't know how to use it, won't be able to navigate through the GED.com or the HiSET page to get it scheduled and used properly. Or you could potentially have individuals that just, you know, give it to someone else. Because on the Reconcile page, what we're going to be doing is, again, if you think of this from the terms of that voucher gets used, it's going to go through GED.com, HiSET.com, and then it's going to come to us. And then we're going to see this voucher code number, and it's going to say, here's the voucher code. It was used. It was used by so-and-so, you know, James Smith, participant ID number, da-da-da-da-da-da, social security number, da-da-da-da-da. Then we are going to go in Teams, and we are going to look for James Smith. And if we don't see that James Smith has, you know, was given this voucher, well, then that's where we break down on the reconciliation part. So that's why all of this is a giant puzzle that has to really kind of, you know, have a lot of accountability to it. Because if James Smith decided to go and give that voucher to his sister's name is the one that's going to come in on the back end. And then we're going to know, well, she's, you know, she's not in Teams. She's not a participant. She was not issued this voucher, because you are going to give us the tracker back, and you're on your tracker, it's going to say, I gave this voucher to James Smith. But if it comes through to us from the actual vendor and it says that it was given to Jane Smith, then we're going to know that there's an issue there. So just kind of keep that in mind, because that's likely going to be something you're going to see with the policy piece of things. And real quick, I just want to say Anna has thrown up. We're still going to be here till noon, but Anna's thrown up, and just reminding everybody, please complete the post-session survey. It just helps us to know, like, is this a good platform to continue to do our business meetings? We've really enjoyed it because it's allowed us to kind of have a bigger audience. Obviously saves us a lot of money in terms of travel and things like that, but we want your feedback. So it's like 6 or 7 questions on the survey. Please take the time to answer that. Okay. Any other questions, Fabiana?
Yes, they're not stopping. These are so good though, especially as we
Yeah, I love
can
it, I
address
love it.
these in
Good.
our AEL policy. We've had a couple of folks ask about, let's say we have a balance of vouchers and a student has already taken either the 4 or 5, if a student has, let me just clarify, if a student has taken the amount that would equal either a GED or HiSET exam, they cannot receive more vouchers because that is how it is written in statute. And because we want to ensure that, you know, there's the accountability piece, we should be ensuring that the subsidy is going to students that are test ready and that there's kind of a check there that we're not just giving out this subsidy to folks that aren't going to likely pass or who might need additional support to actually pass this. So I think Katarina had asked if we have a remaining balance of vouchers and a student needs to retake the exam above the allocated amount, can we do that? And so just in terms of the way the legislation is written, I would say no. And I believe a couple of other people asked about that. Mahali, is there anything more you want to, which is why the tracking of that student and the voucher usage is very important.
Yeah, really good question. And Fabiana's correct. So the answer would be no. And it's just, that's the way it's written in statute. It's the cost of one full exam. So once a student has utilized that and basically have used up that that amount, then they would have to pay for it on their own, or we could refer them to other services that, you know, may have additional resources to help pay for additional exams. And this is another thing too, I think, just locally keeping in mind, you know, what is the policy and what are the procedures for the free retakes. And that's why I said that earlier. We want to be very diligent and be good stewards. So if they're eligible for a free retake, then that's what we need to encourage. Because you never know. I mean, you guys know better than I do that students oftentimes have to do many retakes, especially on math. So we always want to make sure that if there's a free retake that's available to that student, that they're utilizing that first. So that if it goes past the one that's allowed or the 2 free retakes that are allowed, we could still, if they needed a third option, then we could have that third option for them. So just kind of keep all of that, you know, in mind when you're talking about local, you know, really working through this locally with individual students, because their needs are going to be very different.
Kathy Dowdy asked about staff who are working on this. How can they be funded? And I'm trying to find the exact wording she had here. I lost it in the Q&A.
Says, checking back on my question, will we need to fund personnel working on this with state or local funds only?
No.
Yeah.
No.
You wouldn't
Good
fund them any
question.
differently.
Yeah, good question, but no. This could be a person that's, you know, funded from your AEL grant funds, because again, the goal is to either service the students that we currently have in our program, or service former students and former participants. And those are going to be people that, you know, maybe they exited 6 months ago, but, you know, because we are tracking them, AKA you have a WII follow-up grant and should be tracking students after exit. And that's kind of, you know, part of our performance requirements. If they come back and they say, hey, I'm ready, you know, I'm really feeling good about this, then, you know, you can work with those students. For the non-AEL participants, this is a potential for them to be our students. No different than someone coming in our door that may or may not be eligible. We send them through the intake and orientation process. We give them an assessment to determine eligibility. This is the same as that. So they are still potential students, even if they aren't current students. Good question.
We had a question from Anonymous, Mr. Anonymous or Mrs. Anonymous. Does the proof of readiness have to be GED ready? In our AEL policy, I believe we'll provide flexibility on how programs are determining readiness. However, I will note when we are talking about online or remote proctored tests for GED or HiSET, those publishers might have certain requirements in place. So in terms of which students can take online proctored tests. So we want to just make sure that our programs are aware that if you're trying to have a student take the online proctored GED exam, that they are meeting those requirements. And Mahali, if there's anything I missed there, feel free to jump in. I'm gonna keep scrolling because these are really good questions.
I'm loving it, guys. Thanks so much for sticking with us. We've got about 5 minutes left here up until 12 o'clock. Not to say that you can't submit other questions to us, but we will probably end the live portion of the session at 12 o'clock. And if for some reason you didn't get a question submitted, you can always send it through AELTA and we'll add it to the, I say AELTA, AELTA at twc.state.tx.us. It's an email, and we will add it to the Q&A document before we send this back out.
Mahalia,
Yes.
what if the student uses the voucher to pay for the test but doesn't show up for the test?
Good question. I was hoping nobody would ask that.
That's why I had to jump in with it.
Make sure they show up.
Yes, that's a really good question. So the voucher, and you're gonna see this, and this is something, again, is going through contracts with our vendors. This has been a topic of conversation and has not escaped our eyes at all. But the way this is working out, and to be fair to the vendor, it is considered redeemed at the time that they register and schedule their test. So if they don't show up, they just used a voucher. Now, if they here, and this is very important, if for some reason this is a legitimate, like, oh, I scheduled a test, I need to reschedule, they should be able to reschedule. The voucher still stays intact, and they should be able to reschedule using the same voucher. Okay, that's considered a reschedule. If they schedule a test and they're registered for a test and they just flat don't show up and they don't reschedule, that voucher is going to be considered redeemed, and they just lost a voucher. So that's a very important, aspect when working with students, that they understand, and that you guys understand locally as well. So you may want to, track when individuals are taking exams, making sure that you're, reaching out to them before the test day and say, you sure you don't need to reschedule? Because you're using a voucher and this is costing money, and we just want to make sure. Because there are options to actually reschedule the exam, things happen. So you want to make sure that you know what all the parameters and the policies are on the vendor side for making sure that that happens timely and is within the windows of allowability for them, so the voucher doesn't get wasted. Really good question. Man, you guys have good questions. You always have good questions.
And I just put in the chat a link to TEA's test information at a glance. So if you just want to kind of quick look at the different test cost, TEA, who we have a really good relationship with because we're trying to, they're as eager as we are to get this implemented. This is really the page that we want you to become familiar, and which we'll refer into in our AEL policy on this. We will refer to this resource because TEA and these vendors are the ones who set the pricing, and information can be found on that webpage. So I just wanted to flag that to y'all. And I'm sure I've missed a couple, or probably more than a handful of questions because they keep coming, but we are going to read through these and figure out the best way to address this in our AEL letter. But I think that covers all the big ones. I'm seeing kind of repeats here of.
I would bring up one, it sounds like a statement, but I'm not sure if it's correct. Students will need to provide proof that they have taken the paid for test before issuing another voucher.
It's unclear to me what that means exactly.
Yeah, that's why I bring it up. Students will need to provide proof that they have taken the paid for test before issuing another voucher. You wouldn't be issuing another voucher.
Yeah, I think what they're saying is if you've already given them one voucher, they would, need to present the fact that they did register and take that exam before you would give them a second voucher. So essentially the second voucher would be for, either a retaked exam or a new content area exam. That's the way I'm reading that.
I got it.
And the other thing here, folks, too, and we're right at 12 o'clock, is that many of you have access to GED Manager. If you don't have access to GED Manager, that is something that we need to work on. Many moons ago, this was something that we worked out, and we were working with our TEA partners on this and making sure that entities that were AEL entities across the state, someone had access to that information. But things change, turnover happens, whatever. If no one at your facility and no one at your entity has access to GED Manager, please submit that and let us know. AEL TA again at twc.state.tx.us, and we can work on getting access to that. That's also going to help you see and run these voucher numbers. You will actually be able to put the voucher number in the GED Manager and see exactly when those tests are scheduled. If those tests have been taken, you'll be able to see that information, and so will we, I think. So if you don't have it, it's a great thing to have. Go ahead and send us a request, and we'll work with TA to get that processed. All right, it is 12:01. So we are going to end the live portion of our session. Again, tomorrow morning, bright and early, we'll be talking about program updates. And then I don't know why I did this to myself, but we are going to end tomorrow with the team's updates and future enhancements. So I know that's going to be a packed house, and I'm looking forward to your questions, and I'm looking forward to going through some teams enhancements with you guys. That'll be fun. So we'll see you then. Have a great day. See you tomorrow.